In this video, we're going to be covering how to fill out your CA2 or, as you can see here, Notice of Occupational Disease and Claim for Compensation. A CA2 injury is defined as an injury developing over 2 or more work shifts. All that being said, usually it takes months, years, and sometimes even decades to go ahead and develop these injuries. The most common are going to be things like carpal tunnel syndrome, plantar fasciitis, worn out knees, rotator cuff injuries, back injuries that took time to develop, arthritis and osteoarthritis, neck problems, and any other injuries that took time to develop and did not happen on one work shift. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to this form, and that's largely because of this area right here, boxes 11 and box 12. We're going to get to those in a second. What we're going to cover in this video is not only how to fill out this form, but the required information that you need to provide in addition to just filling out this form. Before we start, I want to let you know that there are several pages to this form. Page 1 we're looking at here. Everything on this page you're required to fill out. Page 2, as you can see right here, is for your supervisor to fill out. Everything on page 2, your supervisor fills out. Page 3 has information that we'll come back to here shortly, and this receipt. I'm going to stress over and over and over again the importance of getting this receipt back. Getting this receipt back is not a request, it is your right. Page 4 is the information, or we'll call supplemental information, that OWCP will need in order to get your claim accepted. Going to the doctor and getting a narrative report written is simply not enough if you do not provide them this information found right here. The claim will not get accepted no matter how good the doctor's report is. There's info that your supervisor has to provide. And down here, these are instructions which I will explain to you back up top. So let's go ahead and start right here. Page 1, obviously, we're going to start with employee data. You're going to put your name here, date of birth, gender, telephone number. Now, it specifically says home phone here. If you do not have a home phone, please put in your cell phone or whatever is the best way for them to contact you. Box 6 is asking you for your level and step. This is referring to your grade of pay as of the date of last exposure. The date of last exposure is going to be your last work shift. If you know those, you would go ahead and put those in. However, if you do not know your level and step, not a big deal. It's not 100% necessary in order to get the ball rolling. It's much better to go ahead and get this form submitted because at a later date, you'll be able to enter this information in on another form. Your home mailing address. Before we move forward, I do want to state that everything here must be legible. If you have bad handwriting, have somebody else fill this out. If OWCP cannot read your mailing address and they make a mistake, they will be mailing all of the documentation that they have to send you to the wrong address. This is a problem because you will receive info from OWCP, such as your claim number, that will be very important to your case. If you do not receive it, it will cause unnecessary problems. So please make sure that not only do you write your mailing address correctly, but it is legible. Let's go ahead and scroll down a bit. Starting here in box 9, employee's occupation, again, not too difficult. Box 10, location where you worked when disease or illness occurred. This is going to be the primary address of the facility that you work at. Now, if we look here in box 11, and then here in box 12, you'll see that both of these are asking for dates. I'm going to do my best to explain to you what the difference between these two dates are. Here in box 11, date you first became aware of disease or illness. So let's just say, for example, you have carpal tunnel syndrome. In this scenario here, in box 11, what we would put is the day you first started feeling the pain caused by carpal tunnel syndrome. Let's just call this January 1st. This would be the first time you felt you had an injury, and we're using the example of carpal tunnel syndrome. Well, on January 1st, You started feeling pain. You didn't realize it was connected to work at that point. You just thought maybe you had a sore wrist. This could literally be any other type of injury, worn out knees, aching back, or any other type of injury that developed over 2 or more work shifts. This date here in box 11 is the date that you first realized you had a problem. When we move over to box 12 says, date you first realized this disease or illness was caused or aggravated by your employment. In box 11, we said that this date, when you first started noticing that there was a problem, was January 1st, and we'll just call it 2017. So what's the difference between box 11 and box 12? Well, as time progressed, you started noticing the pain was becoming worse while you were at work. You noticed at the end of your work shift that the pain was stronger than it was at the start of your work shift. Maybe you noticed that on the weekends, it didn't really bother you that much, but on Monday, you started back up at work and the pain came back again. And just for example's sake, let's go ahead and say that you noticed this on March 30th, 2017. In this example, you first became aware that you had a problem on January 1st, and then you realized it was connected to your employment on March 30th, roughly 3 months later. It is not a likely scenario that the date that you became aware of the illness and the date you realized it was connected to your employment are the same dates. Sometimes this does happen, but in most cases, there's several months, even a couple years before someone realizes the injury that they have was caused by their work. Now that we've established a date for box 11 and 12, it's important to make note of something. You have 3 years from the date in box 12 to file a claim. So let's say, for instance, you became aware of your date or illness, and we're going to go ahead and change this a moment, in 2014. And then you realized it was connected to work in 2015. At the making of this video, it's 2018, so this 3-year time period has elapsed. So you would be outside the filing requirements for a CA2 injury. However, I want to show you what the law states. If we look right here, Section 6, it says this paragraph discusses how determinations of timeliness are made in occupational disease cases. In these cases, time begins to run when the injured employee becomes aware or reasonably should have been aware of a possible relationship between the disease or condition of the employment. Where the exposure to the possible injurious related conditions continues after this knowledge, the time for filing begins to run on the date of the employee's last exposure to the implicated conditions. What this is saying is that if it is greater than 3 years, shown here in box 12, if you have gone to work, let's say last week or yesterday, essentially you would have 3 years from yesterday to go ahead and file your claim. All that being said, the time to file is always now. It's always right away. There's no benefit to you or anyone else to wait to file. Waiting to file is waiting for your injury to most likely get worse. One of the biggest problems is that folks delay the time from when they realize they're injured to the time that they actually decide to file. There's no benefit to anyone, including the government, for you to wait. Now that we've squared away the dates, we can move on to box 13. Explain the relationship to your employment and why you came to this realization. As you can see here, there's not a lot of space to write. They're not looking for a novel. They're looking for a brief explanation as to how you came to the realization that, as we're using in this example, your carpal tunnel was caused by work. So here's an example of something that you could write in that spot. On January 1st, I started to notice my wrist started to bother me. I wasn't sure what it was, and it seemed to get worse over the course of the day. I realized my job was causing this problem because on the days I wasn't working, the pain wasn't as bad. It also seems to become worse as the day goes on. This is more than sufficient to put in this spot. Should you need extra space, you can always use a second sheet of paper that you can attach to this form. But remember, we have supplemental information that we need to pass in along, and that's what that can be used for as well. Moving on to box 14. If you have gone to the doctor and he has given you a firm diagnosis on what your condition is, then in box 14, you will put that diagnosis. In this example, we're using carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, let's say you haven't gone to the doctor yet. You don't have a firm diagnosis. You just know there's a problem. Well, if you don't have a firm diagnosis, the first thing to remember is that you're not a doctor. And by the way, neither is your supervisor. Never let them push you into a diagnosis that they think you have. Ask them for their medical license. If they can't produce one, move along. Making the assumption you haven't gone to a doctor yet, well, you don't have a firm diagnosis, so you'll just want to go ahead and put your symptoms in this spot. In that case, what you would write is wrist pain in my left and right wrists. If you have not been given a firm diagnosis from a medical doctor or an osteopath, then you'll just want to go ahead and put your symptoms, just like what we see here, wrist pain in my left and right wrist. And that's it. It's not necessary to go ahead and put a ton of information in this box. It's brief and to the point. This probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm shooting this video for you for instructional purposes only. You might not even have carpal tunnel syndrome, and let's say you do have carpal tunnel syndrome, you might just have it in your left or your right wrist. In that scenario, you clearly would not put left and right wrist. You would just put left wrist or right wrist. Maybe you have shoulder pain in just your left shoulder, then that's what you would write. The point of this video is not to coach you on exactly what to write, but just give you an idea of what's supposed to be there. Moving along to box 15, if this notice and claim was not filed with the employing agency within 30 days after the date shown in item 12, please explain the reason for that. Things that I commonly see here, I heard I would be fired if I filed a workers' comp claim. Something else I hear frequently is I didn't file because of fear of retribution. I thought it might get better. I tried to take care of it on my own. I was just going to use my personal health insurance. I didn't file within 30 days because I didn't know there was a time requirement. Whatever your specific reason is, just go ahead and put it in there. Once again, this is a brief explanation. We're not looking for 3 or 4 sentences, quite literally a sentence or two. Moving along to question 16. If the statement requested in item 1 of the attached instructions is not submitted with this form, explain the reason for the delay. Let's go ahead and move to page 4 of the CA2. Here we are at page 4 of the CA2 form. As you can see at the top, it says instructions for completing CA2, so we know we're in the right spot. This section here has several questions that you need to answer and submit with your form. Now, it's important to note that no matter how good the doctor's narrative may or may not be, your case will never get accepted if you do not answer the questions under number 1. Now, just briefly, if you come to one of our facilities, everything under number 2 will go ahead and submit for you. You don't have to worry about that. However, the burden of proof is on you to make sure that these things get submitted. Now, everything under this section here, employee statement, you have to answer. If you do not, your case will not get accepted. This information is called different things by different people, but for the most part, it's called CA35 information, factual data, supplemental information. I'm going to go ahead and cut away to the CA35 so I can show you that the information being requested in here in item number 1, as asked for in question 16, is the same information on the CA35. So if you use page 4 or the CA35, it doesn't really make a difference. So as you can see, this is the CA35. We know that because in the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see CA35. This form, the first page, is the form that you would use for basically everything except for carpal tunnel syndrome. They do have separate forms for hearing loss, asbestos-related illnesses, coronary and vascular conditions, work-related skin diseases, pulmonary illnesses not related to asbestos, psychiatric illnesses, and as I stated previously, carpal tunnel syndrome. Back to the top. 90% of the folks using this form are going to use page 1. Now, because this information is the exact information as page 4 of the CA2, and it's easier for me to go ahead and use that for our demonstration purposes, we're going to go ahead and switch back there. Here we are back on page 4 of the CA2. Now, the question is being asked here in a separate narrative statement attached to the form. The employee must submit the following information: a detailed history of disease or illness from date it started, complete details of the condition of employment which are believed to be responsible for the disease or illness, a description of specific exposures to substances or stressful conditions causing the disease or illness, including locations where exposure or stress occurred, as well as the number of hours per day and days per week of such exposure or stress. Identification of the part of the body affected. E, a statement as to whether the employee ever suffered a similar condition. If so, provide full details of onset, history, and medical care received, along with names and addresses of physicians rendering treatment. Now I'll go ahead and cut away to an example that a patient has put together and has given me permission to use as long as I blacked out anything personal. So here we are with the patient statement. What you'll notice as we go through this is the patient answers all the questions that we just reviewed on page 4 of the CA2. Let's go ahead and start right at the top. My typical day at the post office starts by me throwing and racking mail. This consists of 200 to 400 letters, magazines, and small parcels into racks. Racks range in height from waist to 5 to 6 feet high. Anywhere you see a blank, I've taken out personal information. With my blank, I hold bundles of letters in flats. Bundles weigh 6 ounces up to 5 to 10 pounds. This is continuous, non-stop, repetitive reaching, twisting, and stretching motions for 60 to 90 minutes each morning. When I complete this task, I pull all of these items out of the rack, putting everything into trays, which are then carried over to large hampers, where I place the trays from waist level down into hampers at floor level. Often trays are placed down on the floor too. Trays can weigh 5 to 20 pounds. Many days I will have 10 to 25 bundles of newspapers, weighing approximately 5 to 20 pounds. Reach down on the floor and grab the bundle strapping, lifting and stacking the bundles in street order before placing the bundles into the hamper. All of these are repetitive motions. When I complete this, I push and pull these hampers across the room to pull the rest of my mail. This is the automated mail. It is thousands of letters and magazines and trays that I sort for every single house through the course of the day while sitting in my postal vehicle. Now it is time to push and pull these hampers out to the parking lot to load my vehicle. I push several hundred pounds out and up an incline to get to my vehicle. This usually takes 2 to 3 trips. This too is a strain on my blank. Standing behind my vehicle, I load my truck. This involves standing, lifting, pushing, and pulling all of these trays, bundles of newspapers some days, and 30 to 50 packages weighing a few pounds up to 70 pounds out of the hamper. I load them into the vehicle from waist height to shoulder height onto the vehicle shelves. During the course of the day, I lift, push, and pull my inventory from the back of the vehicle to the front of the vehicle for delivery into mailboxes at the side of the road, or bring the inventory up to the customers' houses directly. While sitting in a stationary driver's seat in the vehicle for 6+ hours a day, it is constant repetition. I reach, twist, and stretch my blank left and right past 90 degrees all day due to the mail's proximity in the truck. From the shelf on my left, I reach and stretch for the mail to sort. Any mail left over, I reach back to my left to put it back in the tray. This motion with my blank happens 1,000 to 1,200 plus times a day. I then transfer the mail from my left to right arm and stretch and lean out of my vehicle's window 500 to 600 times per day, placing mail into customers' mailboxes. My job is constant repetitive motions all day long. I'm constantly turning and spinning the steering wheel of my postal vehicle in and out of tight spots all day. When I dismount the postal vehicle, I'm constantly opening and closing heavy vehicle doors all day, pushing them and pulling them. Approximately 7 to 8 times over the last 10 to 12 years, I have been seen for my blank by a doctor. Constant repetitive motion at the post office over the last blank plus years has taken its toll on my body and my blank due to years of repetitive motion. Respectfully submitted by your name. The reason why I like this letter is because if you notice, and I'll cut back to page 4 of the CA2, is that it answers all of these questions right here. Now that you've completed your employee statement, you're ready to pass in your CA2. Let's go ahead and get back to page 1. We do have one last question. If the medical reports requested in item 2 of the attached instructions are not submitted with this form, explain the reason why. It's not 100% necessary to have the medical reports submitted with this form because they can't be submitted to OWCP anyway without the claim number. In fact, at the point of submission, you won't have the claim number either. So please go ahead and ask your doctor for a CA20, which will suffice for submission of this form and satisfy question 17. However, if you do not have a CA20, all you have to put in question 17 is not yet completed, and that will satisfy that for that moment. You will need to have all of the medical information submitted, otherwise your claim will never get accepted. In box 18, you will have to certify and sign, so please make sure that everything you put in there is accurate because you will be signing your name to it. As I stated before, once you've completed your employee statement or your CA35 factual data supplemental information, you can go ahead and take page 1 of the CA2 and bring it to your supervisor. They'll go ahead and fill in page 2 of the CA2, and what you'll need back from them is page 3 of the CA2. As you can see here, it says this receipt should be retained by the employee as a record that notice was filed. It is not a request to have this signed. It is quite literally your right to have it back, and it states here plainly, this should be retained by you, the employee, as a record the notice was filed. So if your supervisor says they will not sign, you simply have to point to this line. It is your right to have this. If they refuse to sign and do not give it to you by the end of the day, my recommendation is that you file a grievance. Well, folks, there's not too much more to go over here. If you do have any questions or want us to check your work, we're happy to do that as long as you're a patient at Federal Injury Centers. Thank you for watching this video, and be sure to make it a great day.